science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Podcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. And especially our listeners and friends in Eastern Canada, we hope you are very happy and healthy, or at least safe. The pictures and the devastation from Prince Edward Island in Nova Scotia on the eastern coast of Canada from the hurricane have been pretty heartbreaking. And just know that we're thinking about you. And if any kind of mobilization happens for funds, our family stands with you and will be there to support you. So if you listened to last week's episode, Adam was too sick to run his section, and it's because he got COVID. So he tested positive a day after when we normally do the family section, which is either Thursday night right before I release the podcast or Wednesday night. He tested positive on Friday, and he's been really sick. He's recovering now. He's better, but he was really sick for about 3 or 4 days there. So that's why there was no family section. All right. Well, what's happening on this week's podcast episode? Well, we've got a little article about AI, artificial intelligence, and folding proteins. Okay. In pet science, we're going to talk about the physics of how dogs drink water. Slurp, slurp. And our guest and Ask an Expert is DevOps Specialist Deanna Stanley. It's a great discussion about computer science. Hey dogs, what did the bystander tell the cops that they witnessed after a computer robbed a bank? He went dad away. That's so bad. Okay, on with the show. Because there's no time like science time. This weekend's science news, we're going to talk about an AI protein folding computer program. Now, that seems pretty unimportant to the average person. So let's just bring it back to artificial intelligence. You may not know, one more thing that I've added to my plate is I am the de facto leader of this group of social audio experts called the Conversationalists. And our podcast, The Conversationalists, you can find now. It's a podcast. They are just a team of people from different walks of life. And I was one of the speakers on the last panel, and it was all about the future of education and will artificial intelligence replace teachers? And I'm of the thinking that it won't. I don't think artificial intelligence can do what teachers do. Maybe it can do a great job of teaching curriculum, but it can't be a person to the kids. So that's where artificial intelligence is, and maybe affects my job. But why would artificial intelligence be such a big deal with proteins? There is this artificial intelligence system called AlphaFold, and it made news because it broke the bank on how many proteins it folded. 200 million rendered proteins. Again, this number doesn't make sense to the average person. Like, what is that a big number? It's a big deal to know how proteins fold, because how proteins fold, just one application, is how drugs could potentially affect cells or things that they're trying to have the drug infiltrate. That's just one idea. And proteins are notoriously hard to predict because they fold weirdly, they corkscrew, they're bizarre. Here's another reason why this 200 million number is a big deal. In the decades previous to this artificial intelligence program, our best researchers have figured out about 200,000 protein folds. So we're talking an order of magnitude in a year versus decades and decades. And AlphaFold isn't a person. AlphaFold is an algorithm. It's not a team of engineers working around the clock, real humans using resources and with a team of scientists and lab underlings to do their biddings. This is AlphaFold, a computer program, and it outpaced what humans, scientists, can do. Now, there's a double-edged sword. These protein folds are a template. They're a possibility. And while some researchers were very happy when this article came out that AlphaFold had this massive database, some researchers are like, hold on. Just because the computer says it could be this way doesn't necessarily mean that in nature it is that way. Sometimes things in nature go against what the general rules would expect a protein to look like. Some researchers are like, wow, this database is huge. Any protein that we want to look up for any kind of drug or any kind of application, we just type it in and AlphaFold spits it out. Other researchers are like, just because the machine told you this is what the protein looks like, we still need to test it. If you ever take a look at a protein, like a drawing of a protein, and we're not talking about like the protein like in a steak that a bodybuilder would eat. We're talking about proteins made of long chains of amino acids. They are bizarre. They're folded into weirdo corkscrews and like the curly ringlets of Goldilocks' hair. Some look like you gave a marker to a 3-year-old and told them to draw a picture of the Mona Lisa eating an apple, and that it's just a scribble, right? So these proteins are bizarre, but how the amino acids connect together are governed by a series of rules at the molecular level. And that's something I know a little bit about in my area of chemistry, is all of these molecules have pulls and tugs and different forces. And the algorithm uses the most likely probability of how those forces would move the amino acids into different shapes and different twists and different curls. Before this point, scientists had to use very labor-intensive ways to figure out the shape of proteins, like X-rays. They had to freeze it. They had to bombard it with electrons in those transmission electron microscopes for other weird ways. This is a database that just takes algorithms and probabilities and spins them into shapes. One application I'll just mention, and it's kind of funny because I just finished talking to my Science 10 honors about the organelles of the cell, and the nucleus of every cell has these nuclear pores, and that allows material to get in and out of the nucleus. And the nuclear pore is made of proteins in part. And that's been a puzzle for scientists for the longest time. Each pore is relatively huge compared to the size of a protein. So there are thousands of pieces that make up a nuclear pore. And up until AlphaFold, in the decades that they've been working on this, science only knows about 30% of the puzzle. AlphaFold straight up doubled that in a year. The overall confidence rate went from 30 to 60%. So now we know 60% of what the nuclear pore is made of. For biochemists, that's a big deal because that's how things get in and out of the cell, which is really important if you're studying how a virus gets its DNA inside our nucleus, especially if you're, HPV or something like that, which has the DNA that lives inside our own DNA. So in closing, AlphaFold is the potential to shave off decades of experimental and I guess theoretical studying that a scientist might have to go through before they start to develop a drug or an overall idea about what a protein might look like. The cautionary tale from some scientists is that we still have to test this. See what AlphaFold says, take a look at your protein, and use the tried and true methods to get to the fact that that is exactly what the protein looks like. Now, this is only 1 year of AI. And when I talk to AI scientists, they're always like, AI is moving so quickly that nobody can keep up with it. So in a year or two, I'd be curious to see what's happening with AlphaFold. That's science news for this week. This week in pet science, we're going to talk about dogs and drinking water. A lot of the times, the things that I decide to talk about on the podcast are either articles sent to us from our amazing supporters and listeners and fans, or real life things that happen in real life. This is a real life situation. So I don't know if Chris has mentioned it on our live pet chats on Twitter, but she got a bowl for Ginger that kind of bubbles because cats like to drink from running water, I guess. And the dogs love Ginger's water dish. So they love to drink from Ginger's water dish too. So we're constantly having to refill it because instead of drinking from their water dish, they're going to drink from Ginger's. I don't know. Bunsen and Beaker are weirdos. But Bunsen, when he drinks from Ginger's water dish, is so incredibly sloppy. Like normally he's a good boy and he doesn't make that big of a mess when he drinks. I don't know what it is about the other dish, but he makes a lake after he's done drinking. He drinks so fast from because blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it reminded me of a video. I forget, I think in university, a professor showed us the slow motion of dogs drinking water. And it's not what you expect. Like they drink from, oh my goodness, Ginger just poked her head into the podcast room. Hello, Ginger. Dogs don't drink the way you think because they drink kind of like with the back end of their tongue. I'm sure somebody studied this, and guess what? They did. This study comes from the American Physical Society's Division of Fluid Dynamics, or the DFD. So some know-it-alls in how things move fluid-wise. They studied how cats and dogs drink. One of the things that really helps dogs drink, and cats too, is they have some kind of anatomy called incomplete cheeks. And it's kind of freaky. They have the cheeks built that way so they can open their mouth impossibly large to kill prey. So they don't have the same kind of mouths that we do because we don't kill by biting. They do. They straight up, you've probably seen, maybe you've got a cat or a dog that's got a mouse or something, and yep. Anyways, and because the dogs and cats too have these incomplete cheeks, there's no way for them to make a vacuum effect. Like think of if you're drinking from a straw, you know, you got that little kissy sucky action and it sucks the water up. Same thing when you take a drink from a glass. You're using negative pressure and dogs can't do that. Dogs can't do that and cats can't either. So how do they drink? Well, okay, it's a two-part system. You can do this yourself. You can videotape your dog drinking. It's way easier if they have a giant tongue like Bunsen. So in this two-part system, the tongue plunges down into the water and then pulls. And what's really interesting from a fluid dynamics perspective, I learned so much from reading this little bit of back and forth between these fluid scientists. So when the dog's tongue goes down into the water, they create a ton of acceleration, like 5 times the acceleration of gravity, but in reverse. And that creates a water column. And because water is attracted to water, it creates a water trough in reverse back up to their mouth. An interesting thing they found, and this definitely is true because I've seen Bunsen drink water, and then my father-in-law Gord's little miniature schnauzer drink water. The larger the dog, the more their tongue plunges into the water. And it's because usually the larger the dog, the more the dog's tongue can exponentially move water up into their body. And it's just because they have a bigger tongue. The researchers mimicked a dog's tongue with these glass tubes and the same acceleration down of the average dog's tongue and the same acceleration back up of the average dog's tongue. And they were able to perfectly mimic the water column that dogs make. And dogs just bite the water closed. They bite their mouth closed when that column comes up to their mouth. Like they're smart enough to know that the water reaches a point where gravity wins again and they've got to, like they got to go, they eat it. They have that gulping effect. And even little dogs do it too. So I just think that's so cool that it's a completely different way to drink water. And if you don't think about it too much, like dogs drinking water, but there's so much interesting physics that goes into the slurpy slurp action of dogs drinking from their bowl. That's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, before we get to the interview section, I thought I'd let you know how you could help out the Science Podcast. The Science Podcast will always be free to download. You'll never have to worry about paying for it. But here are some ways that you can help us out. Number 1, check out the merch store, www.bunsenburnerbmd.com. The merch store has adorable gear, the Beaker stuffy, and now text from Bunsen. Number 2, think about joining the Pawpack community. It's going to be replacing Patreon, so thank you Patreon supporters. But if you aren't part of the Pawpack, we'd love for you to join. Our new community will take what we do on Patreon and supercharge it. There's going to be so many cool perks to joining the Pawpack community. Look for it in the next couple weeks. Third, think about reviewing the Science Podcast on a podcast player and giving us a great score. It really helps. Back to the interview. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have DevOps engineer Deanna Stanley. How are you doing today, Deanna?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you. This is a really interesting area of STEM, and all about computers and engineering. Before we get there, where are you calling into the podcast from? Where are you in the world?
I am in Washington, D.C. Very exciting.
Washington, D.C., where all the action is. You want to hear a funny story?
Yeah.
Because I'm a Canadian, I always hear some Americans who live around that area talk about the National Mall. And I thought it was a shopping mall until I was like 30.
You're
I
not
thought,
the only one. I
I was
actually
like,
knew so.
I thought like, can you get like, is there clothing there? And they're like, maybe. What do you wait a second. You don't think it's an actual mall? I'm like, I don't know. I've never been there.
I actually knew someone who was a DC native and thought the National Mall was a shopping mall.
And the other thing, Deanna, like I introduced you as a DevOps engineer. What's your educational background, just so people have a framework?
So I've actually got a degree in computer science. I
Mhm.
started out my life as a programmer, slinging code, and sort of migrated to this over the course of more years than I care to admit.
That's okay. And what got you into computers coding when you were young? Like, if you've done it for a while, was there something when you were young that was the spark?
I tried to play around a little bit with programming as a kid, didn't really do a lot until I hit college. Freshman year, I was in the engineering school. I was actually a geological engineering student way back when, and
Mm-hmm.
we had to take a programming class. It was mandatory, and I really enjoyed it, which is why second semester freshman year, first day of organic chemistry, I decided I was changing major.
Oh, it's the organic chemistry that did you in.
Exactly. I am a programmer because organic chemistry killed me.
um, I like I've talked to a couple other programmers, and I think I forget if I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I was in middle school, we got the old Apple computers that you could put code into. And there was these books of programming with like reams and reams of code you'd have to type in perfectly to get your computer program to run. And if there was an error, it's like, oh well, your game just doesn't work. But when I eventually got it to go, it was pretty exciting. I programmed using this book's help a very simple ski game where the skier skied down the hill and you just had to dodge trees.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I skipped some code somewhere because I was invincible. The trees didn't kill me. So there was no end and there's no way to die. You just skied, which would be the perfect game in real life. But anyways.
Well, we learn through making mistakes. And that's one of the things actually that DevOps emphasizes is that it's important to fail because we learn better from failure than from successes.
Right, you just learn 10,000 ways not to do it.
And you know what? That's fine. Again, there's so much we can learn from failure, and a lot of our culture is afraid to accept or embrace the fact that failure is part of life. And so we end up getting people who, don't speak up in meetings because they don't want to be mocked, who don't make risky decisions because they don't want to have the results that happen. And so innovation dies, and when it comes to software, you end up getting these big monolithic monsters that are really hard to support.
That's a good point. I think, when I was younger, though, failure was really tough on me. But now that I'm older, I sometimes do little panels with building costumes because I do that in my spare time. I build costumes, cosplay costumes. And I always know the first time I build something, everything's going to go wrong. And I'm totally okay with that because you get so much better from every error that you make. But when I first started out, it was very frustrating. I think it's just like a learning process, an education that people just you might even have to experience it to know that it's okay to fail.
Yeah. And it's scary. And I mean, it's not just scary for you, but you've also, especially if you start at a new job or a new project, you've got a new manager and you don't know how they're going to react because sometimes they'll smack you down for anything that's even has a whiff of failure. And others are like, oh, yeah, this is great. What did you learn from it? Come share what you learned with everyone else. Yay. But you don't know, and so you just stay quiet and you only try and do easy things so that nobody knows that you might
Gotcha.
fail.
Now, this is a perfect segue into what you are an engineer or a programmer of, and that's DevOps. Could you talk to us about what DevOps is?
All right. DevOps is also known as DevSecOps. I'm just going to throw that out there because you may end up hearing the term DevSecOps. You may hear DevOps. You may hear SecDevOps for some people who are like trying to really pander to the security people. We like to make a joke that we should just call it SecDevSecOps, Sec, because the security people are always worried that you don't put enough security into your process.
I love it.
But what it really is trying to get all the people who are involved in software development from beginning to end to work together as one to help eliminate bottlenecks and improve the flow of software. So it used to be when we did software, developers would work in their own little silo and they'd build up all this great code and then they'd throw it over this wall to the testers. And the testers would look at it and they'd run a bunch of their tests and then they'd come back and they'd throw it back at the developers and say, it doesn't work. And the developers would grumble and complain, and then they'd develop a little bit more and throw it back over the wall. And this would happen maybe 2 or 3 times. And eventually the testers would say, okay, it looks good. And then it'd go to security, who would run their own security tests. And they'd be like, you violate all these issues. And they throw it over the wall back at dev. And at this point in time, the developers are really getting pissed off because, dang it, they want to see their code in production.
They're just getting hammered.
Exactly. But it's like, okay, fine, all those stupid security people, and we fix all this stuff. And they're like, oh, by the way, a new 0-day bug was found, so you've got to fix this too. So eventually they get through both testing and security, and they go to operations. And operations looks at it and goes, we don't support this software. What do you mean you want to use Red Hat version 6? We only run Red Hat version 7. We can't support this.
Oof.
And at this point in time, it is amazing that the heads of the developers don't explode. But part of the problem is, like I said, every single step, you're throwing it over the wall. These teams don't talk to each other. They don't work with each other. And so what happens is you get everyone's focused on different goals. Developers are focused on features. I want to release this number of features by this period of time. Testers, they just want to make sure there are no bugs, because if anything's found in production, they're going to be smacked. It's going to be like, why didn't you find this already? So the testers want to make sure everything's perfect. Security guys are much like the testers. They want to make sure there's no security breaches. Oh my God, when they hear things like SolarWinds or that Target breach back in 2013, they have nightmares for weeks. I mean, this is just, they don't want this happening. And then the operations guys just want to keep everything up and functional. In fact, the operations guys would be perfectly happy if the developers never gave them anything, because then there's no change and everything is stable. So you've got all these competing needs and desires going on. So part of DevOps is getting them all together to work as a team, which is incredibly challenging, to put it mildly, because usually there's years and years of bad feelings between all the various different groups. Plus, you've got different managers who have different values, and it can get very ugly. But the idea is, if you can work together as a team, you can hammer out these problems earlier in the system so that they're faster to fix. So the fact that operations doesn't run the operating system version that you want. Well, if the operations people are involved in the development process at the beginning, when someone says, oh yeah, and we're going to use blah, 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 it runs on, Red Hat 6, they can say, oh no, we only run Red Hat 7. Whereupon the developers could go, and go back, redesign things, and save significant time than if they waited all the way till operations, when suddenly they don't have to just redesign things, they have to recode it, retest it, resecurity scan, etc., so forth. So the idea is, the concept's called shifting left, is pushing everything earlier into the cycle if possible, to get the groups to talk to each other and share information so problems can be addressed earlier and with less pain.
So
There's also an automation part, but everyone focuses on the cool tools and the automation part, and that's not the important part.
The important part is the teamwork. So Deanna, with DevOps, where do you come in? This is kind of a great framework. It sounds very exciting. Now, where does Deanna Stanley fit into the puzzle?
Hey listeners, this is Jonathan Cormer, and I'm Sir Reginald T. Hedgehog. We're from Dorktale Storytime, a podcast for kids and their pop culture loving grown-ups. We tell fractured fairy tales with a geekish twist, hidden hero histories, and world-building lore stories. So come on down to Once Upon a Time to laugh, learn, and delight in a tale well told. Find us at dorktalestorytime.com.
Usually I come in to try and help the teams work better together and smooth out the problems. DevOps also includes automation. So the idea is once you actually know how to do something, you automate it because then it's done consistently and significantly faster than when there's a human in a loop. But to get to that point, there's a lot of people interaction that's actually required to get people to understand each other, to talk, heck, even just speak language. I remember coming in one time and the developers were like, the operations guys come to all our meetings and they never say anything until right at the end, and then they tell us we can't deploy what we've done. And you talk to and you're like, well, this doesn't make sense. So you talk to the operations guys and they're like, yeah, we go to all the meetings and they talk all this tech stuff that we don't understand. And we don't know what the heck they're talking about until we suddenly see the end product and we realize it won't work.
So they're both right. They're both right, but the language they're using is wrong.
Exactly. So sometimes it's just as simple as helping them get on the same board and being able to talk to each other and use the same language. There's actually a lot of ego stroking that's involved because everybody thinks their part is the most important and that everyone should defer to them. So it's like, yes, you're right. You are the most important. But because you're the most important, you can you can make this compromise and still remain the most important. So, be nice to the little people and can you just do this for them?
It's almost like using the force against themselves, like some kind of like judo.
Sometimes it's tricky, and there's a lot of education. And what's interesting is generally the low-level people get it. It's management who doesn't, because they're used to being able to manage software in a very linear fashion. Okay, we're going to design, we're going to code, we're going to test, we're going to do security, we're going to deploy, boom, we're done. Well, now it's all sort of mishmashed together, and the schedule you've got doesn't really exist. And honestly, decisions should be being pushed down lower to the people who actually do the work because they actually understand the problems that they're being asked to be solved. And so management's like, wait a second, where do I fit in? I'm going to lose my job. I don't feel important anymore. And so it's helping them work it out because management's actually got a very important role, but it's not so much, standing over people and asking for their TPS reports. It's instead going, had to make an Office Space reference. But now management's job is to try and eliminate those roadblocks that are preventing their teams from succeeding. So it's management's job to say, hey, why haven't we made any progress on this? And they're like, well, we're still waiting on the new computer system and it's tied up in procurement. Well, manager's job is to go, take a baseball bat to procurement or, take them out to dinner, wine and dine or whatever. Get them to sign the down. Exactly. So that your team can get the equipment they need. So management's role becomes that of a facilitator and not as someone who is controlling everybody's actions.
Now, from your experience of getting things rolling with DevOps within software development, is it faster? Like with the pains that people go through, is it faster or is it better? Is there a result from all of this?
Oh, when done well, and let me tell you, it is hard to do it well. It is amazingly better. You can push out hundreds of changes, usually even in a day, because you make very, very small changes. It goes through the system. It's automatically checked. It's tested. It's security checked, everything. And it gets deployed with no human involved in getting it through that pipeline. There's humans involved, of course, in writing the tests and writing the code, et cetera, and so forth. But it all gets pushed out automatically. And it means that bugs, so you find a problem, time to address a bug goes down from weeks to minutes.
Big deal. Big deal. Yeah. And that saves so much money. Like, I'm familiar with like video games because I love video games. And if a company has some kind of game-breaking bug and it takes them weeks to solve it, they're going to lose so much money as opposed to like a patch that comes out the same day. Yeah.
It is.
Deanna, I have another question. So this is very, very big picture for our folks that are listening in. Where could they maybe have experienced this system in their own lives? Like, where could they have experienced the benefits of DevOps in their own lives?
You do it every day. Do you use Google or Amazon or Netflix? Those three are the top DevOps shops in the world.
Really?
Yeah. Netflix pushes out approximately 500 changes a day. Google pushes out 5,500 changes a day, and Amazon 23,000 changes each and every day through their DevOps pipeline.
And
which is why you could pull something up and see something, and the guy who's sitting next to you pulls up the exact same page and sees something different.
It's changed in that amount of time.
Correct.
And it obviously makes sense that it works because those are just the huge, massive companies that are successful.
Yes.
Oh, man. Well, you know what? This has been really interesting talking about DevOps, something that I know nothing about. And I think most of our listeners will also know nothing about. So thanks from that end. We're going to move on to some of our standard podcast questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So after we chat with our guest about their area within science and technology, one is to share a pet story from their life. Could you do that? Could you share a pet story from your life with us?
Sure thing. My current dog is a Great Pyrenees, and they're smart. If you take a look on a lot of pet intelligence sites, they're actually listed as being only medium smart because they don't instantly respond to commands. That's because they think everything through and decide if they actually really want to do what you're telling them to do or not. I mean, honest to God, I can see my dog. I could see the wheels churning sometimes, but he watches and he knows what's going on, which I discovered one day when I was in the living room and our mail carrier came by and he starts barking because, this is what Great Pyrenees do. They bark.
Yep.
And he suddenly ran up to the front door and tried to undo my deadbolt.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
And you know what? He has succeeded. About as often as Bunsen gets moose legs, Grimble manages to undo the deadbolt.
Oh, you can undo it. Oh,
yes.
Boy, that's terrifying for maybe the mail carrier that thinks he's safe outside.
The good news is he's yet to figure out the doorknob. He tries, but he can't turn it.
And your dog's name is, what did you say, Grumble? Oh, Grimble. Aw, Grimble. That's so cute. How long have you had Grimble for?
Are you an engineer, want to be an engineer, or would like to know how engineers think? Hi, I'm Aaron Monker, host of the Being an Engineer podcast. We've created this podcast as a central repository for industry knowledge and best practices to accelerate your learning curve within the discipline of engineering. We've interviewed over 150 top-performing engineers, including those from MIT, NASA, Apple, and even YouTube sensation, The Hacksmith. Find us, the Being an Engineer podcast, with the orange and blue logo on your favorite streaming service. Again, that's the Being an Engineer podcast.
It's been 8 years now. I got him as a puppy, as a rescue. He'd belonged to an older gentleman whose family ended up putting him in a nursing home. And he had 3 dogs, all under the age of 3, which they surrendered to their local kill shelter. I worked for a rescue association at the time, and they picked up all 3 of them. And I was asked to foster Grimble, but it's like as soon as I saw him, it's like, I'm going to adopt him. And the lady who ran our rescue group's like, I know. I saw him on the list and picked him out for you.
Oh, that's super cute. I'm glad he's got a nice home too.
Me too. He's a good furball, even if he did try and chew my car up one day.
Pyrenees are way bigger than Bernese Mountain Dogs, but they're just as fluffy. Is he white? Is Grimble white? Or
he's white. He's got a couple brown spots.
Okay, so some of the they kind of look like polar bears if you're not looking too carefully in the winter. At least that's what I think they are.
Oh yeah, they're big, fluffy. You know the old Western movies where the tumbleweeds would sort of go across the screen? Imagine that made out of fur, and that's my living room.
Oh, I feel with Bunsen, who's a Bernese Mountain Dog, and then Beaker. When now that there's 2 of them, it's Shedmageddon during the spring. I'll tell you that. It's the worst. Man. It's the worst. You're buried in fur.
You can learn how to spin that into yarn. I'm actually doing that with his fern.
Well, thanks for sharing your story about Grimble. I hope he remains inside and doesn't work the doorknob.
So far, so good.
The other standard question that we ask our guests about is the super fact. And the super fact is something that that when you tell people, it kind of blows their minds a bit. Do you have a super fact you could share with us?
Well, okay. Super fact. I've got a good super fact about DevOps, if that works.
I'm excited.
Okay. So I told you that Amazon does 23,000 pushes a day. And this is to their entire ecosystem. How long do you think it took them to go from a standard software development methodology to their DevOps methodology?
I have no frame of reference for this. Years? Decades? I don't know.
13 years.
Oh, wow.
People think this is a fast thing to do. They can just, wave their hands and say, let's do DevOps. Well, it takes time. You've got to go slow before you can go fast.
And is that because the folks that you have to win hearts and minds to change it over?
That's at least part of it. You've definitely got to get the people on board and doing it. But there's also, so once you've got everyone working together, you're already seeing synergies, but then you want to get to the automation part. And that takes a lot of work ahead of time. You've got to suddenly automate all your testing. You've got to figure out how you're going to review security scans automatically and decide if something is safe or not. There's a lot of manual prep that has to go on before you can actually go ahead and push that button and make it all happen.
Gotcha. Well, that's pretty incredible. So for companies that are wanting to change, I mean, it's great that they want to change, but they're looking at a bit of a time frame to get there.
Yeah. I remember someone saying, oh, yeah, I think we can become a high-performing DevOps team in 3 years. And God, trying not to laugh, I'm pretty sure, I pulled a muscle. It was just not going to happen.
It's the same thing when I tell kids, you cannot study for this the night before. And they're like, yeah, we're going to. Okay, we'll see how that works out for you. Yeah, you bite off more than you can chew, and it's just not part of the process.
Exactly.
That is a super fact. So we're at the last question on our podcast interview, and Deanna, this one is about you, but outside of your area of work. It's called the important to you section, or the important to you section, where we ask guests to share something that they're passionate about. It could be a hobby, or it could be a cause. and you wanted to talk about public defenders, which is really fascinating. We haven't really had anybody talk about the legal system yet as a passion or a hobby. Could you talk about what you're passionate about there?
Well, yeah. Down here in the U.S., I'll admit I don't know the Canadian legal system, but we have the Sixth Amendment, which basically guarantees everyone representation in court for criminal cases. So we have a public defender system that is woefully underfunded. And so what happens is, let's face it, if you're rich, you're set. You can hire yourself a dream team. That glove is not going to fit and they will acquit. This is not a problem. But the majority of people who get arrested are indigent. They can't afford a lawyer. Oh my God, you know how expensive a lawyer is? So they're
expensive.
God, yes, they are. So they have to deal with public defenders. And there's so little money out there for the public defenders that these people are not actually getting, if you ask me, true representation. I think we're violating the Sixth Amendment by not providing true representation to the indigent. There's not enough funding. Public defenders, they can end up on food stamps. They frequently, they have less than 1/10 of the budget that a prosecutor's office have. They usually have so many cases that they can't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on it, which leads us to pleading all these cases out because the defenders can't actually handle fighting something in court. So even if you're innocent, you've got a chance of being stuck in jail for, it could be up to a couple years before you actually have your chance in court, or you can plea out, be found guilty, and to at least get home to your friends and family. And it's partially because we don't have the system that's necessary to support these people. And it's wrong. We need to fund public defenders better. Oh my God, do you realize there's a parish in Louisiana that won't grant to anyone a public defender until after they've been arraigned? So you have to go up in front of a judge and plead guilty or not guilty without a freaking lawyer next to you.
You don't know what to say. You don't know what your options are.
Yeah,
your options are. Your options are guilty. Your options are to say guilty or not guilty, but unless you've got background, you have no idea.
Exactly. It's incredibly offensive. Going back to Louisiana again, for all things, New Orleans, their public defender's office is based on traffic tickets. They get a percentage of all the traffic fines. Well, after the hurricanes, less people came to New Orleans, so they had less traffic tickets, and they literally had to do a GoFundMe account just to keep their public defender's office running.
Oh my goodness. Or switch a bunch of signs maybe, so there's a bunch of new parking tickets.
I don't think any of them thought of that, but I'll have to suggest that one day.
There you go. Just move all the signs I was going to say 1 meter, but a couple feet the wrong way, and boom, then you got your budget back. But I think that's a little unethical. Maybe just a smidge. I'm not 100% sure with what the system is in Canada, but I know it's similar in that if you cannot afford representation, it's provided for you. I don't think it's funded great, and that's probably an issue that Canada also needs to look at for sure.
Yeah. It's, people talk about America being, a prison country, and in many regards, they're right. And we have a lot of people who are in prison who shouldn't be, and that's because they can't get the defense that they need.
I'm Cam.
And I'm Aunt. Recently, on the podcast Dirt Road Discussions,
I tease the parents, but I'm like, you're paying me to let your kids do my chores. So
Channing Tatum, he works with you. Could you just talk a little more about your relationship and the vodka that you produce?
Man, I've got a raincoat on right now, Cameron.
So as a butterfly, it remembers being a caterpillar.
You'll hit some bumps, but your head still hits the top of the aircraft.
Who knew farming could be so interesting?
To hear more, join us on the Dirt Road Discussions podcast, wherever podcasts can be found.
I did listen to a podcast where they were talking about about that, and maybe with somebody who knows more than me, you can probably chime in and fact check me. But that was the thing, is that somebody had a charge brought up against them, and they could plead not guilty, but that meant that they would be in jail waiting for their day in court because they couldn't afford bail.
Yes.
Or they could plead out to community service, like very little. They have a criminal record though because they pled guilty, but they get to go home. And if they're like a provider of the family, or they're going to lose their job, that's very enticing to somebody when your back's up against the wall. Am I on the right track?
You are completely true. And it is. It's like, I can either wait for a year until we actually go to trial, or I can go home in 3 days after I've done time served. I know which one I'm going to pick, at least short term, but long term, it hurts you because, okay, you are now a convicted criminal. You can't get certain jobs. You can't buy certain things. It's going to follow you for the rest of your life, and it is going to hurt you for the rest of your life. All because you couldn't get decent representation.
This is a really important discussion, Deanna. Thanks for talking to us about it on the podcast. I love this section because we get to, I learn stuff about folks from different parts of the world. Like, I know a lot about Canada. America's just south of us, but I'm always learning new things about the countries around the world, and some of the cool things and some of the not so cool things happening in them.
Yeah, I mean, for all that's good, there's always going to be bad. There's balance in the world.
Deanna, we're at the end of the interview. This was so fun. You are such a great speaker. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Can people follow you online? Is there any website you'd like folks to check out?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter. I don't do a lot of DevOps there. It's my personal account, so you're going to see pictures of my dogs. You're going to see a lot of snarky comments. I'll promote various different fiction authors that I like. But if you're more interested in actually following DevOps and what's related to it, I'd recommend looking at Gene Kim. That's Genekim. He's basically the father of DevOps, and he's written a great book that anybody can read about DevOps. It's called The Phoenix Project.
Oh, cool. Okay. All right. So we'll have a link to both you and Gene in the podcast.
All right. That's great.
Perfect. All right. You must be outside. I hear birds chirping, or you're around birds.
I have got my windows open.
Oh, I love it. I've just been really enjoying listening to the chirping birds in the background as we've been talking. So thanks for being a guest today. I hope you get out to mingle with the birds today.
Well, thank you. I think I'm going to go take my dog for a walk.
Ah, nice. Okay, take care of yourself, Deanna.
Thanks. You too. It was great to talk to you.
Okay, it is time for story time with me. If you don't know what story time is when we talk about stories that have happened within the past 1 or 2 weeks. I will start. I have 2 little mini stories. The first one involves the little
you getting
chicken.
COVID.
Actually, that's true. I have 3 stories. First one, I got COVID. It sucks. It's the worst. Good thing is that I kept caught up with school, but if I didn't, I'd be so screwed. I would be so screwed. But no, I kept caught up with school, and it wasn't the worst. For the first 2 days, I could do nothing. I just sat in bed with a headache. My ears were plugged, and looking back, my vision was sort of weird, but I was coughing, sneezing, and all I could do was sleep. All I could do.
You were very sick.
I was very sick.
But we had no family section last week because of it.
Yep, because I had COVID. And then I started to feel better, and I got to say hi to the dogs and the cat, and I was very happy to say hi to the dogs and the cat, and I love them, and they were very good for me when I was sick. But yeah, that's one of my stories, is that I was sick, and because I've been sick and haven't been able to do the podcast, I have tons of stories. My other story concerns the chicken. the little baby chicken. I saw it again. We have decided not to name it Fart.
Okay, good.
Even though that's like a Bart Simpson type of name, Fart.
Yeah.
No, we've decided we've decided against that. And we are going to name it Mozzie, like mozzarella cheese.
Oh, cool. I like that.
Because it's like cheesy. But yeah, that's the chicken's name. And then my third and final story is that Ginger really likes coming into my room now. She really likes it, but she's not a very welcome house guest because she knocks everything over, pulls out all of my cables from my computer, and then starts chewing on them. So I got to like kick her out halfway through the night. I got, Ginger, get out.
Yeah, and she comes up to our room, and then Beaker follows her around all night.
Yep, that's how it goes.
But even worse, she's taken to now scratching the mattress, like right by the bottom mattress, the box spring, and it goes, and then that's at 3:00 in the morning.
All right, so that's my story. Dad, do you have a story?
I have two little ones. It has been a while since I remember a fall as nice as we've been having for the last like 3 weeks. Sometimes we go from summer and we have about a week of fall and it goes right to winter. Like it just snows sometime in September. Like it gets gross and rainy and sleety, but it has been sunny and gorgeous for like 3 weeks and the colors are changing everywhere. The farmers got the crops off the field. So, Chris and I have been taking the dogs on walks, and where this is going is Beaker has found a pool of deep water in one of the bends of the creek bed. The creek bed's completely dry. It is actually, I'm stunned. There's still areas of the creek bed that has water, and one is still relatively deep. Up until maybe a week ago, Beaker was swimming in it. Like she had to swim, and she goes in it, and I call it the Beaker Slough. She has to go in her slough every single walk. She goes in there. She wades up to her neck. She might paddle around a bit. She eats aquatic trees. It's really funny. And then Bunsen goes to the other side of Beaker Slough and he has a slurp. He drinks some of the water. Now, I know where some of you might be listening and you're a little worried. They're like, what about the blue-green algae? We don't have to worry about that. It's too cold. Yes, blue-green algae can form in Canada, in Alberta, but generally during the summer months, and it's quite rare. It's way too cold now. It's just a water pit, and it doesn't smell bad, so it's not stagnant. But it's Beaker Slough. The other small story is Bunsen rolled in something, and Chris and I have been so busy we haven't been able to take him into town to get a bath. And it's like the right side of his head just reeks. It's so bad. And we feel bad because nobody wants to pet him because he smells so bad. So he's like, why? I think he's wondering why people are ignoring him. It's because he just smells so bad. So I feel bad for Bunsen. So we have to give him virtual pets to keep him happy. Those are my stories.
All right, Mom, do you have a story?
I sure do. Yep. So this is me now. It's been very busy. It has been so incredibly busy that I think Bunsen's feeling it. And he misses us incredibly. When I come home, he is very much glommed onto my legs. And Beaker too. Beaker will run and get a toy. But she's like, oh, I'm so glad you're home. I'm so glad you're home. But Bunsen is very adamant that this is a new routine, and I'm not sure he loves it. One of the indicators that he doesn't is that he likes to be up at 5 a.m. 5 a.m. wake-up calls this past week. So I don't know. Hopefully he gets back into more of a routine where he's more content to sleep past that ungodly hour. Other than that, it's just been very busy with a lot of things to do. So that's my story.
Wow. The shortest mom story in podcast history. Usually it goes off on like the longest tangent ever, but nope, not today. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to my section of the podcast. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.
That's the end of this week's show. Thanks for coming back week after week to listen to us. We'd like to give a special shout out to Deanna Stanley, who talked to us about DevOps. I think we all learned an interesting area of computer engineering. I think it's pretty cool. It's not something we always talk about on the Science Podcast. We'd also like to give a shout out to the new Pawpack Plus top tier members. Now we're getting things organized. We don't have the list full yet, so Chris is going to read the names from last week, and we will have new names for the new Pawpack Plus community at the end of the podcast. So we're really excited about it. Okay, Chris, take it away.
GBLB, Tracy Domingue, Anne, Julie Smith, Sharon Dotson, Andrew Lynn, Elizabeth Parmentier, Peggy McKeel, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Hallberg, Jenny Jaguar, Chris Kelly, Leila Perriello, Sam, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Provin, Renee Hardy, Jody Ogren, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coops, Marianne McNally, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, Ben Rathert, and Bianca Hyde.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.